Hi, I'm Chris Jussel, and this stop on the Antiques Roadshow is Minneapolis, Minnesota. As always, we never know what we're going to see, but today our experts will be on the lookout for some terrific Art Deco pieces, a good painting or two, and perhaps we'll find a wonderful piece of Victorian furniture. In any case, we always have a surprise and a great discovery. It's the Antiques Roadshow from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Stay tuned.
Antiques Roadshow is made possible by the Chubb Group of insurance companies, who, along with 3,000 independent agents and brokers, can insure your world.
And by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
The Minneapolis-St. Paul area was first established as a military post after the War of 1812. These falls at St. Anthony, where the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers join, fueled a grist mill. That grist mill supplied flour to Fort Snelling, one of a series of forts built by the U.S. government in an effort to promote white settlement and drive the Native Americans further west. Fur traders, farmers, and missionaries soon moved into settlements near Fort Snelling. One of these was renamed St. Paul, after Father Lucien Galtier built a log chapel there dedicated to his patron saint. 10 years later, a second village took root. The settlers called it Minneapolis, combining the Dakota word for water, mini, with polis, the Greek word for city. Between 1865 and 1880, 3,000 miles of rail were laid in Minnesota. Lines transporting grain and farming implements stretched east to Chicago, north and west to Lake Superior, and across the Dakota Territory. The abundance of wheat coming in on the railroad created a boom of flour production, and Pillsbury and General Mills eventually became American household names. Here we are at the Hyatt Regency Minneapolis, and inside our expert appraisers have already begun to look at antiques brought in by hundreds of people from around the Twin Cities area. Now, let's go inside and see what's happening.
Helen, you were telling me a little bit about the background of this bear. Do you want to share that with us?
Sure. It was my husband's when he was just a baby. He was born in 1908, so I'm sure it's 85, 86 years old.
Close to that. And what do you think the bear, who it was produced by? What are your feelings on the bear?
Well, I really don't know. The only inkling I have is that I did find an article in an antique magazine, and it spoke about the Ideal manufacturing company.
Right, which was an American producer. And what made you think that it was Ideal instead of anything else?
Well, I had taken it to the Historical Society, and they said that Steiff had always put a little button in the ear.
Right.
So that's how we determined that it was not a Steiff bear.
Well, that's interesting, because I want to point out some things to you about the bear, and then, I'll ask you what you think it might be worth. If you look at the bear, it has boot button eyes, which are these black boot button eyes here. The button that you're talking about would have been in this ear here. But what happened is a lot of times, especially at the turn of the century, the buttons were taken out because little children would chew on the bear's ears and maybe swallow it. So sometimes the buttons are not in the early Steiff pieces, okay? The other thing that I want to point out is you can see the stuffing here in one of the pads. This stuffing here is what Steiff used all the time when they were producing their bears at the turn of the century. Steiff started to produce the bears around 1905. You can also see the pads, the felt pads, and if you feel, there are these discs in the arms that make them move, which is also very typical of the Steiff bear. Now, if you squeeze the bear here, you can feel that there was a little squeaker and a little spring mechanism that made a noise.
Oh, is that right?
And that also was very typical of the Steiff bears that were produced at the early part of the century. The stitching, you can see the stitched claws here. as well as the nose, the stitched nose here.
Yes.
Now, the horizontal stitching here on the nose, that indicates that the bear was produced at the early part of the century.
I see.
Okay, so in looking at it, even though it doesn't have the tag, there are other factors in the bear that make it very easy to identify that, yes, it is a Steiff bear because of those things. Now, what do you think something like this would be worth?
I wouldn't have the vaguest idea.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't.
Yeah. And what would you say if I told you that this could bring about $3,000 to a collector?
I would like to find the collector that would pay me the $3,000.
That's me too. Isn't that wonderful?
Thank you.
You're a hardy soul to lug such a big piece.
Oh, sure. I got my
think
workout
it's
today doing this.
the biggest piece I've seen yet on the Roadshow. So what can you tell me about your carpet?
Well, I inherited this from my grandmother, actually. As far as I know, she purchased it probably in the 1920s. Had it in the dining room of her house, and she had a companion rug to this in the living room. It was larger, probably about 12 by 15. Then in the 50s, when they put wall-to-wall carpeting in, she moved it upstairs to an upstairs bedroom. And I always absolutely loved this rug. I just thought it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen.
It's quite a nice carpet. And it's also in wonderful condition, which is nice to see in a carpet like this. It was probably new in the 1920s when your grandmother acquired it, because that's where it dates from. It's a carpet from Persia. It's an Iranian carpet from the city of Meshed, which is in eastern Persia. And I want to point out one thing about how you can identify that. Mesheds are great. The Meshedi weavers were great in that area. So whenever you see this multicolored finish here on the edge of a carpet, you can be pretty much assured that it's been woven in Meshed. For the rest of the carpet, the design is picked up. It's really a derivation of a 17th century design that you would see used throughout Persia, primarily in the cities of Isfahan and also around Meshed and Khorasan. It is just a nice representation of the Persian version of paradise, which is a lush, plentiful garden. Do you use the carpet?
Actually, no, I don't. I don't really have a place to display it properly right now, so it's been rolled up in a spare bedroom in my mother's house.
Oh, okay. Well, should you ever have the opportunity to use it, we usually don't talk about things like this, but I'd like to talk a little bit about how to care for the carpet, so when you do use it, because it's in remarkable condition now, and it would be nice to keep it that way. You should rotate it about once every 6 months or once a year, turn it completely around so it doesn't develop wear patterns. It also, if there's any fading happening from the sun, that'll even out the fading of the sun and keep the carpet in really good shape. The other thing I'd recommend is underneath the carpet is to use a carpet pad. Either a thin piece of rubber if it's going onto a hardwood floor, or what's called in between, which is if it's going down on wall-to-wall carpeting. That helps keep the carpet secure to the floor and stops it from slipping, so it also makes it a bit safer to live with.
Good. Safety first.
Yeah, and the other thing to do is if you start living with it is have it cleaned periodically, not too often, and that cleaning a rug too often will actually hurt the rug. But having too much dirt in the rug will also hurt it because the dirt acts as an abrasive and just wears away at the bottom of the knots. The knots are tied of colored wool yarn on a cotton foundation. So the warp and the weft threads, which are the foundation threads, are made of cotton. Have you ever had it appraised?
Never.
Do you have any sense of its value?
None whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I would say because it's a great design with wonderful color and in just immaculate condition, if you were going out to buy this rug today, you'd be looking at a price of around $15,000 to $20,000.
Not bad for a little inherited piece here.
Yeah, well, so it's worthwhile taking care of as well.
All right.
Why don't I give you a hand rolling it up so you can lug it back home?
Thank you.
When she was going over to China, I told her, find me some little statues of little men and make them as old as you can find them. And that was her mission, and then she can tell you how she was able to find them.
How did you find them?
My husband and I were in Wuxi, China, just northeast of Shanghai, and we were working there for 2.5 months. and in a factory, and we went to this little shop. Every Sunday we would go over there, and
a little antique shop.
Little antique shop, and I asked him about them, and I think
who was the shopkeeper? Was he an old fellow?
He was an old fellow. Yeah, his family, his wife was there sometimes, and a son. Pretty popular with the Americans that were over there, and he wanted about 3,000 NT for them.
Which is about $400 US?
About that, yes. I kept looking at them, and I had a Chinese girl come with me. We went in and negotiated with him and got him.
Was he a tough negotiator?
Yeah, he was. He really was a tough.
He didn't want to cut the price.
No, he didn't, but he ended up cutting the price considerably. We finally got them for about 200 NT after we had finally said...
About $30?
About $30, which...
Well, that's a drop, 400 to 30, isn't it?
Well, we had walked out, and I said, no, I don't want them. It's too much money.
And did he come chasing you?
He came chasing me with them and said, okay, okay. But we had bought probably maybe $200-300 worth of other items that day in the store, too. So that was the last thing I was
What did he tell you about these?
He really didn't tell me a whole lot about them. I had no idea if they were really old or not.
Did you get the impression they were pretty old?
The Chinese gal that was with me knew a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit about older antique items, and she told me she thought they could be, but they may not be. So I just took a chance on it.
Well, next time you go to China, I'm going to give you some tips.
Okay.
So you know what to look at, okay?
Okay.
One of the first things to look for are the colors that are used in the glaze enamels. And if you notice on all of these, the colors are very bright and glassy, which is indicative of enamels that were used in the late 19th, 20th century. And in particular, the rose-colored enamels that were used, or the bright blues, are colors that are also typical of late 19th century. These are depictions of what are called the 8 immortals, which are 8 Chinese deities that are very common in mythology and literature. And you see them represented all the time. So it's nice that they're all together. But if you were also to flip it over and look at the underside of one of these, I'll just lie it on its back, you would see that the color of the clay is sort of a bony white grayish color, which is not a clay that was used in the major ceramic center of Jingdezhen. So you know that this wasn't made in a major place. It was sort of a regional production, a little minor production. The likelihood, frankly, is that these are almost brand new. You can get things like this pretty easily. They're often represented to be much older than they are. And the value of them probably is about $2 each. So you've got 8 of them, which is $16. So you paid $30, so you got taken a little bit, but not too much.
Okay.
But that's exactly what they are. So next time you go to China, you look for things that are these bright colors and you run the other way instead of buying them, because they're not going to be as old as they said they are.
Well, certainly old it is. You've brought us a very wonderful 18th century, what we call Santos figure. Most people would look at this and say it's a doll with wings, but actually it's from a long history of religious figures that were made in Neapolitan Italy. And there was a whole school of craftsmanship involved with this kind of carving. And this is one of the most subtly and beautifully carved figures I've seen in some time. With the well-modulated hair and the beautiful carved and polychromed wings. This is, as you can see underneath where the flaking of the paint happened, a wood body that has horsehair. It's been stuffed, so it becomes such a large figure, and glass eyes, which is more common for the figures that were older. In the 19th century, they started just painting in the eyes because, of course, that was cheaper. Most of these creche figures were made for Christmas scenes, and for one to have survived in this condition, even with the minor flaking, is miraculous because the size is so incredibly big.
How might it have traveled to Wisconsin?
A lot of Catholic background has come to this area, and a family might have brought it. A church might have actually ordered it from an Italian church. It's very hard to say how these things migrate from one area to the next.
So my research led me to the book The Angel Tree from the Metropolitan in New York, where the angels illustrated there have similar form in their faces and also very similar paint on the wings, although the size is radically different.
This is probably the only publication that shows Creche or Santos figures like the kind that you have, and this tree is at the Metropolitan Museum. It was one of the most fabulous things to go visit. But I have to tell you that as wonderful as this tree is, there's nothing as big as this archangel that you brought to us today, who, I don't know what the angels looked like, so I can't tell if he's Michael or Gabriel or who is he. He's been redressed, as you can see. This muslin that's been put on is of a newer variety and somehow got these nice little 19th century petticoat panties, which were probably from a doll.
She was dressed in lavender polyester. He or she was dressed in lavender polyester when I found her, and I'd like to get the right shape gown back on her.
It is a fragile piece because of the flaking, which inherently comes from the paint on this very old wood, which is an unstable material, and so consequently this beautiful paint is coming off. Do you have any idea of what the value of an object like this would be?
I don't have any idea, and no one to whom I've sought out has been able to give me any idea, because no one that I've found has ever seen an angel like this before.
How much did you pay for it?
I paid $1,500 for it.
Well, it's certainly a very good investment. Sales of European works of art at auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's have very rarely had objects this wonderful, and they bring between $10,000 and $15,000. So you made quite a very, very good investment. And
as if I would ever
piece.
Want to sell this wonderful piece.
Absolutely.
Bill, this is quite a flag you brought in today.
Oh, thank you.
What can you tell me about its origin and its history?
Well, I received the flag from a man named Foster Cannon who had a bookstore in Milwaukee. And I was going to Marquette University, and I'd buy things from him, and we got to be pretty good friends. And then one day he told me that he was moving his bookstore to Washington, D.C. And he said I couldn't afford to buy the flag from him, but he would give it to me because we were such good friends. So he told me that this is the flag that flew over President McKinley in 1901, September, when he was assassinated on September 6th.
That's correct.
And of course he died September 14th is when he died, and Teddy Roosevelt took over.
And the book here, it shows the building in which President McKinley was shot, Temple of Music, Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York.
Right.
And if you look closely at the flag here, it's similar to the pattern flag here. The flag is very typical of turn-of-the-century construction. You have machine stitching. You have reinforced corners here, which on the fly end, which would protect it and give it more strength. You also have an eagle here that's stitched in the middle, and then you have a painted pattern throughout the wings. What's really neat about this is, as we've discussed, it came from the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York in 1901. You have the PAX, Pan American Exposition, 1901. And then last but not least, you have the grommets up in the corners, which are really good for identifying a flag from the turn of the century. I love the old tag that comes with the flag that's attached here. Official flag of the Pan American Exposition, held at Buffalo, New York, 1901, where President McKinley was assassinated, loaned by E.J. Allen.
He was assassinated by an anarchist. And on September 5th, he gave a speech at the Pan American Exposition. But on September 6th, he was in a reception line to meet people.
In the Temple of Music.
Temple of Music, right. Anyway, he was in line, and he had a weapon bandaged up in his hand and with a sling. He got up to him and he shot him.
.32 caliber weapon. He shot President McKinley twice, as a matter of fact.
I don't remember how much now. I haven't read up on it for a while, but McKinley didn't die then. He didn't die until a week later.
Right. Now, at the exposition where he was assassinated, there would have been a number of flags of this particular pattern that would have been flying around the exposition. Have you ever assessed the value of this flag?
No, I have never.
And you got it as a gift, correct?
Yes, okay. Because he said I couldn't afford to buy it, but he would give it to me. And he said it was the flag that was on that pole.
Great. The flag from the exposition, as I said, there would have been a number of flags flying around the exposition at that time. The flag just on its own from the Pan American Exposition from 1901 would be worth somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000.
Wow, good.
However, and I strongly encourage you to pursue this, the tag here says loaned by E.D. Allen, which means it may have been loaned to a local historical society or a school or whatever. If the accession records exist and indicate that this flag was indeed the flag that flew outside the Temple of Music when McKinley was assassinated, this flag would probably be worth somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, that's great.
So it's worth doing some homework to see if you can prove it.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I think I will.
So it's a gorgeous flag.
Yeah,
it's in excellent condition, and I would gladly encourage you to do some research and see if you can prove it's the one that was right outside the Temple of Music.
I'm going to do so.
I notice you have a plate, a coronation plate, that has the likeness of King Edward VIII. Yes, and that, can you tell me a little bit about the piece?
Well, it has an interesting story because it was Coronation China for Edward VIII, who never was crowned. And it has the date, May 12, 1937 on it, which was to have been his coronation date. My mother and father grew up in Nova Scotia. My mother was a real Anglophile with a fascination for anything dealing with royalty. In December of 1936, I saw that there was going to be china available commemorating the forthcoming coronation of Edward VIII, the old Prince of Wales. So I immediately, as soon as it was issued, went down to the local jewelry store and bought my mother a set of 6 of these plates and a matching cake plate for her Christmas present. It didn't cost very much because I was a Depression college student. And she was very pleased to have this lovely china. About a week later, Edward, the Prince of Wales, abdicated. Well, I bought this within 3 days of that time. The first week in December of 36, after the death of George V, I bought this, and it was immediately taken off the market. I don't know whether nobody wanted anything to do with this man who was marrying a divorcee.
And an American, yet, to boot.
Yeah, an American of all things. But whatever it was, this china, which had been used, I presume, throughout the empire, the potters were licensed to do coronation china, and this is a Canadian piece honoring that coronation and giving the date. But it disappeared, and my mother treasured it very much and passed it on to me, so it's been in the family, and we've had it for 50 years ourselves.
Do you still have the original set?
We have 6 of these plates and a cake plate that went with it in fine condition, and we frequently use them for English tea parties.
Yes, yes. This type of commemorative material is very collectible, and this particular one was licensed, as you said, to a Canadian potter, here shown on the back. And we have a very unusual picture here of the king, who, again, was never crowned. How much did you have to pay for these at the time?
Well, a college student would pay for his mother's gift, probably $1 or $2, at least a very, very small
$1 per piece?
Yeah, possibly something like that.
In 1936. Well, I think that across the board, you've probably done fairly well. These are, in that he was never crowned, fairly rare. And my best information at this point is that they are worth $400 to $600 a piece.
Wow.
So that could add up to a very nice sum over the $10 or so that you may have spent in 1936.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your sharing that with me.
What areas of Japan did you live in?
Well, we were in Tokyo for 2 years at language school, and then we were down in Yaizu, the fishing village, to Kariya in Aichi-ken, to Okazaki, and then up north to Sendai, and then for 9 years in Sendai, and then we ended up in Toyota, where the cars are made.
Toyota City, the sister
Yes.
city to Detroit.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what did you do in Japan? What was the purpose?
We were missionaries at church planting.
Now, this is an interesting piece of Japanese art that you've brought with you today. Tell me where you got it.
Well, we were in northern Japan at Sendai, and one of our friends, a college professor, was retiring. And we went over to bid her goodbye, and at that evening she had received many gifts from her students, and she just couldn't take any more with her. And so she turned to us and said, "Would you like this?" And I was very happy to receive it.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, having lived in Japan, you can explain some of the significance of some of these items just as well as I can. For example, the symbol
The plum.
The plum.
That blooms in January and February when the season's at its coldest. So it's a sign of endurance.
And here we have
The bamboo. And that bends with the wind and doesn't break.
Right. And the pine. We have the young pine.
I don't know why they had the pine in there. But it's always those three. Chochukubai.
Right. Now, the one thing that kind of confused you about this piece was this bird here.
Bird.
Now, you know that having lived in Japan, there are a lot of rivers there, and along the river there are hawks that fly over those rivers and prey. This happens to be a white hawk, which is very rare, but also it works kind of nicely with the plum blossoms that we have up above here.
All right.
What we see here are all young trees. We see a sprouting pine. We see just young bamboo shoots and not the very thick stalks. We also see a tree that's growing and coming up. Notice all the branches are going upwards. That shows youth and vigor and endurance, as well as the white coat of the hawk, which shows youth as well. So the Japanese people love these enduring images of things that happen around their time. What I think we have here is a very, very fine example of Japanese scroll painting. It's signed down here, signed by the artist, as well as the seal chop or the hanko. This came in its own balsa wood box as part of the gift.
It even smells good. It does.
It sure does. Now, a piece like this probably today would bring anywhere between $500 and $1,000 for a collector at auction. So it's a pretty nice gift.
A nice gift.
Yeah.
Anyone else has some, I'll take it.
Now, let's take another short break from the ballroom here at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. There's a little-known aspect to the world of antiques that most of us are unaware of, and that's the role that corporations play in collecting and preserving art and antiques. Here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, there are probably between 25 and 30 corporate art collections. Barbara Dice-Roth is down at the Norwest Bank Building with one of those collections.
I'm here at the Norwest Collection, the corporate collection of 20th century decorative arts in Minneapolis. The Norwest Collection is the only collection of its type in the United States to be devoted entirely to the decorative arts of the 20th century. Over the last 10 years, they've been able to put together an extraordinary collection of wonderful objects representing all the major countries and all the major workers within those countries. There's some of my personal favorites here at the Norwest Collection, which I'd like to show you today. Included in these objects are wonderful lyrical Tiffany floriform vase, an extraordinary Gallet cameo glass and bronze lamp, which is very important in the fact that it was designed around 1900, where we didn't have electricity. Electricity really wasn't known to be in many homes at the time. So this is a very unusual object and a very rare object. My very, very favorite in the whole collection is a Sèvres porcelain vase dating from 1937. The body was designed by a man named Henri Rapin, who was the designer at Sèvres at the time. It was decorated by Anne-Marie Fontaine in 1937. It's beautifully painted in blues and pinks and greens with a tropical landscape. Even though I do work in the 20th century arts, it's not really what I collect. I do collect 18th century American decorative arts. But the one thing I do have in my collection, which I just love above all others, is a piece of Sèvres porcelain that I brought here today from New York. It's a little bit earlier than the piece in the Norwest Collection and not quite as important. But it was done in 1923, designed by the same artist as you see here in the Norwest Collection ginger jar. As you might know, Sèvres began to be produced in 1753. It's always been subsidized by the government of France. You might think that because it's been produced by or subsidized by the government that it's not very good quality and not very innovative. On the contrary, they've been able to produce the finest quality works of art in porcelain and other ceramics that were ever made as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Barbara. We're back in the ballroom at the Hyatt Regency Hotel, where Antiques Roadshow specialists have been looking at hundreds of antiques brought in by people from around the Twin Cities area. For those of you at home, we hope to see you at a future Antiques Roadshow event when we come to your city. Now, let's get back to business.
Ms. Reiser, can you tell me about these two items that you have here?
My parents were in the retail liquor business in the early 1900s, And these was part of the glassware that they had. And it's been in our family ever since. We've had them at the cabin.
And you have sets of these, I understand.
We have 6 of each. That is all that's left.
Really? Well, I'll tell you, I think you have items that have a very special value in a number of ways. One, since we are from Minnesota, these appear to me to have been made by one of the many potteries in Red Wing, Minnesota. We had several of them functioning at the same time 100 years ago. And there was a consortium called the Union Stoneware Company, and then eventually became Red Wing Union Stoneware Company. I believe that these 2 items were produced by the Red Wing Stoneware Companies. They have a value in that regard as ceramic objects made in Minnesota, and Red Wing collectors would be desirous of having them. They also have another value, a double appeal, in that they're examples of antique breweriana. For those people who are interested in collecting items related to the beer industry or brewing industries. So these I would date from probably the period of 1900 to maybe 1920. This item is a particularly handsome one in that it has what we call sponge banding on it. Unfortunately, I could see a little bit of a crack in this one here, which does lessen the value of it. Without the crack, how about $125 a piece?
Wonderful.
This one is not cracked and would have a lesser value, but perhaps maybe $45 to $55. And of course, the more you have in a set, the more desirable. I think you have some real treasures here. And
great.
They're part of our history as Minnesotans, and indeed, if your family has been involved in the retail liquor business, this is very special to you and to your family.
Yes.
I would encourage you to treasure them and take good care of them for the future.
We've been drinking coffee out of them at the lake. Won't do that anymore.
No microwave use, I would say.
No, we have some crackled. They were in the microwave.
Okay, be very careful of them because they're quite collectible and very desirable.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Well, that's terrific.
It was a daughter-in-law who said, you know, I think they're worth something.
Indeed they are. Very
Yes.
special items.
Your timber table, sometimes called a sofa table, is a large one in the federal style. It came from this house in Somers, New York. Tell me something about your family and this house.
Well, my family came from Somers, New York. The first field to come to St. Paul came in 1856. His name was Thaddeus Crane Field.
Several other objects, including the portrait of Governor DeWitt Clinton, came out of this house.
Well, the house is in Somers, New York, which is a small village. They had the house until about 1936.
So the table and the portrait migrated west to St. Paul?
About 1935 or 6, I would say. Yes.
And some of these pieces of furniture were published around 1910 in a book on early antiques, The Quest of the Colonial, were they not?
The Quest of the Colonial was a book published by a couple that were looking for colonial-style antiques. They bought what was known as the Elephant Inn there and made that their home, I believe.
The Elephant Inn because?
Because of Barnum and Bailey having both lived in Somers. As a matter of fact, in the Elephant Inn, which still stands in Somers today, they have a room up on the top floor that's a sort of a miniature setup of a huge circus.
What can you tell me specifically about this table?
I really don't know a great deal about, except that it came from the field property in Somers.
This late federal style period table, made between 1825 and 1835, in that style of Duncan Fife and Charles Honoré Lagnier. One of the things I've noticed about it is the dense mahogany. These are very heavy leaves. This is a very good table. What do you think it might be worth in the market today?
You know, I have no idea what I say, perhaps 4,000 or 5,000. I don't know.
Well, it's a great interest in this period of federal furniture. I would say more in the range of about 2,500 to 3,500. Federal furniture is sought after the period of Duncan Fife and Lagnier. This is a very good example and very good condition, and also very interesting to know that it began life and was in this house in Somers, New York, until it moved west in 1935.
Yes.
What I brought you, I don't personally own. I'm an insurance agent, and I have a customer that had to be out of town this weekend, so brought it into my office like on Thursday and said, could you take this down to the antique show and have it appraised? And when I saw what I had is an elephant tusk, and this kind of like off of the whale, I was pretty nervous about bringing it down. I thought maybe the animal rights people might be outside and wouldn't like me bringing this in.
If we look at the decoration first on these pieces, you'll notice that the tooth, the whale tooth itself, is decorated with a whaling ship and whales. You see the mothership here sending out their whalers in boats and spears in their hands and stabbing the whales, and the whales in and out of the water. It's really quite a momentous event that they've depicted. On this piece, it's actually dated 1794, depicting a military action from the 18th century. These pieces, however, are not all that they appear to be. They are the epitome of what you'd hope to see on scrimshaw decorated whale's teeth. This is actually the tooth, shaped tooth of the whale, and this, rather than being an elephant's tusk, is actually the jawbone of a whale, meant to be the jawbone. But in fact, these things are not made of bone at all. They are made of a resin. They are a material that's a plastic. The way we see that is by looking in the interior of the tooth. We see a mauve color, which is not right. Also, the feel and handle of this piece. There is a great deal of this material coming out of Asia. I think you have nothing to worry about at all in terms of the animal rights folks. All we are looking at here is plastic. How did the owner come across these things?
He picked them up at a garage sale, and I'm sure by looking at the date he thought that he had something that was really old, but no particular value was paid for it at all. Very, very inexpensive.
It was a minimal value.
Yes.
I think that for people it might be one of the tip-offs because these two pieces, were they correct and were they right and were they really an 18th century piece of American scrimshaw and were this an early 19th century, we'd be looking at tens of thousands of dollars in terms of value. So if he paid only a few dollars for each piece, you have to start to ask yourself some questions when the bargain is too good. Well, these were just too good to be true.
Oh, well, he really thought he had some value, and I did too, because I've never, known, but that's interesting.
So when it looks too good to be true, chances are it might not be true.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
What do you think it is?
It looks like a doll mounted on an acorn.
Well, let me tell you, the name of this game is you tell me what you know about it, and then I'll tell you.
Well, actually, I don't know too much about it. I just happened to come across it one day while cleaning. We were getting ready to move. It was in a closet. I'm assuming it came from my aunt, who is a collector of many things. She must have bought it at a garage sale or an estate sale of some sort. But other than that, I don't know anything about it.
So it just sort of magically appeared one day when you're cleaning house.
Right.
It's what we call a candy container. Because mounted on the back here, you'll see this little snowball, which actually is a little cardboard box that could be filled with candy or a little present or a little prize. And then this could be used as like a party favor or as a little gift box. Often it was candy that was put in there. So generically, we call these kinds of containers candy containers. This is a particularly nice one because it's basically built around a bisque-headed doll. And it's probably a Huback doll. It's a German doll maker. They made dolls like this, usually dressed in white suits that they call snow babies, and they were favors for holiday parties or like this with a string attached, could be hung from a Christmas tree with a little gift in it. What makes this one a little extra special is it's a snow baby, but he's dressed in a Santa Claus suit. He's a child baby dressed as Santa Claus with his little container. And I'm not sure whether this pine cone is really original to the piece or not, but it makes a wonderful place for him to sit, to hang on the Christmas tree with a little present in the snowball on his back. It's really just exquisite. I've never seen anything exactly like this. That's one of the real joys of candy containers, is they made such a proliferation, such a variety of them that, you know, you're always finding new ones. This one had some damage at some point on his feet, and somebody touched him up, but that's really minor as to the value of it. The detail is exquisite. The condition is phenomenal for a piece of this age and this delicacy. It dates from, I'd say, 1900, 1920, in that period. It's always fun to find out some history about something like this. It's very hard to put a value on these things because a lot of them are just virtually like one of a kind almost. I would have to guess. I would say somewhere in the range of $1,200 to $1,500 would be the retail value.
It's a nice find.
Yes, I think it was a nice find to find in the closet and take home. You have a real treasure there, and you want to keep it under that glass dome you brought it in, because as I say, it's exquisite and a real gem.
Well, we've seen some wonderful antiques here today in Minneapolis, and there's more to see. But first, here's Jim French of Christie's with some observations on what to look for when buying a fine Oriental rug.
For many people, buying an Oriental carpet can be a very intimidating experience. So if you don't know a lot about Oriental rugs, spend some time before you buy something. Really familiarize yourself with carpets. Go to a lot of different dealers, look at a lot of different types of rugs so you can start to understand the differences in design, coloration, and decide what you really like yourself. What determines quality in Oriental carpet is a very complex thing. It involves quality of color, quality of design, quality of wool, age, rarity, and quality of weave. And if you spend the time and look at a lot of different rugs, you'll start to familiarize yourself with those things by listening to what other people are telling you, comparing and contrasting that information, and coming up with your own thoughts. One thing you should also be very beware of are going out of business sales or hotel auctions that promise great discounts of 50 to 80% off the original price. Usually, those sorts of reductions just represent a small discount from an exorbitantly inflated original retail price. Another thing to beware of is the stories that you'll hear from a lot of people when they're trying to sell you a rug. Most of rug information that we know is just that. It's stories, lore, and myth, and really not based in fact. So you should take it all with a grain of salt. One specific thing I'd like to point out along that lines is the issue of knot count. It's a commonly held myth that the more finely a rug is woven, the better quality it is, and therefore the more valuable a rug it will be. But in fact, knot count has little to do with quality or value in an Oriental rug, and that rugs from different areas have different criteria in terms of the way they're woven and how you judge them. Here we have two rugs from the Caucasus, one a Shirvan rug from the Northeast Caucasus, and the other a Kazakh rug from the South Caucasus. The Shirvan has about 150 knots per square inch versus the Kazakh, which only has about 50 knots per square inch. Under the commonly held belief, therefore, the Shirvan would be viewed as a much better and more valuable rug. But in fact, both of these rugs are worth about the same, which is about $10,000 today. The most important thing, though, when you're looking to buy a rug, is buy what you like. It should be something that you're going to live with for a long time and enjoy and hopefully pass on to your children.
Thanks, Jim. That was great. And I guess one moral is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Now, let's go see what our next few tables have in store for us.
We have in front of us a little pottery mug or tankard. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it's something that was in my great-grandparents' home. I'm not sure how long they had it. They gave it to my grandfather, and about 10 years ago, he gave it to me in a collection of household items he thought I might like to have. And it's just something we keep in the china cabinet and enjoy looking at.
Do you know anything about the particulars of this piece?
I know that it's Dedham pottery, and I know it's an Eastern company, but other than that, I really don't know anything.
Okay. Well, it's a very nice example of Dedham pottery. It was a company formed in 1896 in Dedham, Massachusetts by members of the Robertson family. They closed or went through and then closed in 1943. So Dedham, Massachusetts is just south of Boston. This crackle glaze with a blue glaze decoration is very typical of their tableware. This one, as you see, is in the rabbit pattern. Now, there are 4 different types of rabbit pattern. This one happens to be 2-ear rabbit because you see both ears. Here, on the bottom, we have the ink stamp mark, which was used until, I believe, 1943, from the beginning till the end. Beside it, we have the impressed mark, which was used until 1932, I believe. So that would date this tankard before 1932 in that it has both marks. It's a lovely little piece. Dedham pottery, very collectible these days. The market is very, very strong. I would say we're in the range at auction from $800 to $1,200.
That sounds very good to me for a little piece that sits on the shelf.
Sure, sure.
Yes.
You have a beautiful lamp here. What can you tell me about it?
Well, very little history. We believe it was a wedding gift to Kent's grandmother in about 1903. We know that it's been sitting on a desk in Kent's parents' living room, our living room, and it's been in use ever since.
Right.
Except when the kids are that age, and then you put it away for a year.
You put it away for a year. Absolutely right. That's the way it survives. No, I thought you had some feelings that it might, in fact, be French crystal.
Yes.
Well, I must tell you that this is an American art glass table lamp. It's manufactured by the Pearpoint Company, which was started in late 19th century in New Bedford, Massachusetts. This shade is called a puffy, the way it puffs out. It's interiorly painted, and the lamp is fully signed, which I would like to show you.
So turn it off.
And take the shade off. We could turn the light out. And then we can see if we can find it. I'll move this around till I can find it. And then you might want to take a look. It's right there. See that, Pearpoint?
I do see that, yes. Yes.
That's the signature. It's painted on the interior and then signed at the factory with the name of the factory. Also, the base, again, is fully signed. You will see here.
Oh, there it is. I see that.
Pearpoint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it is an original shade and base, and it was produced, the year would be approximately right, your family tradition, about 1903. For your information, it would have, if you went to sell it, this lamp would bring somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000.
Wonderful.
Great.
Wonderful box, early piece, very late 18th century or early 19th century casework here with the dovetailing, and obviously original brass. What do we have in here?
Well, it's my father's. He bought it here in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's a hurdy-gurdy.
Yep, absolutely right. And I try to take this out very carefully. And if you could hold that just for a moment. We'll put this case away. Let's take a peek at it closer. I mean, this is quite an amazing piece to find in a place such as Minnesota. I think it's far from its home. It's most definitely French work, and it's actually signed by the maker here, right on the top, and that looks like Bassot. It's in great condition, actually. I like to think of it as the first mechanical instrument to ever come along. The origins of it are very old and not really sure where it came from, though there's a lot of mythology that places it coming from the east through India, and we don't really see it in Europe until come the 11th and 12th century. It's a six-stringed instrument with strings that sort of pass through. It's tuned up here at the top, and if we slowly take this off, this is a wheel that is actually rosined. The instrument is played by cranking, and here's the cranking that wheel, and as it turns, the rosin on the wheel activates and aggravates the strings, and you get a sound just like a violin. But with a wheel, it's continually playing. These are called the tangents, and this is the tangent box, and you can see it's a wood mechanism for actually playing the strings, stopping the strings at different scale. So you don't have to be very exact. You just pull the button out and there's a note for you. It's earliest known forms of this in Europe, they were much bigger, and actually so big that it would take you and I to play it, or I'd sit here and crank and you would play the tangents. And it's not until into the 15th century where we see them in this form. I would place the date at somewhere around 1718, made in Mirecourt, and as I said, by Joseph Bassot. The inlay all around here, I think it's actually whalebone and ivory. And that black whalebone we know as, here in the United States, as baleen. Where did you find it again?
It's something my dad brought home. He goes around different wherever here in St. Paul and Minneapolis and buy stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just something he came across one day, and he likes unique instruments, musical instruments, and this is definitely a good find.
I'll say my dad from New Jersey never brought anything home like this. Okay. Any idea of what the value of it is?
No idea.
Do you know what he paid?
It wasn't much.
It wasn't much. Well, I'll tell you, I think it's quite a valuable piece. One in this condition, I would put at probably around between $4,000 and $6,000, fully restored and in playable condition again. You'd probably find this on the market for upwards of $6,000.
Wow.
It's a great thing. Great thing.
Wonderful.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have any strings for it. I wish we could play it, but maybe in a year from now you'll have it all restored and we'll hear it again, and you can bring it in and crank it up.
I sure hope so.
It's done by somebody who's just trying to jazz it up a little.
I collect African American memorabilia, and I was down in Dallas, and I purchased it from a Mr. Mitchell in Dallas, Texas, and he had purchased it from many years ago from Aunt Sue of Denton, Texas, and it had been in her family since 1878. So I brought it down today because I was interested to find a little provenance on the picture and what you could say about it. It's a Walker painting and a field scene, and
well, it's by William Aiken Walker, who was an artist who worked mainly in the Deep South, painting scenes of rural life. And what makes him interesting is really he was one of the only artists to really be painting this sort of subject. He's generally more interesting from a social point of view than an art historical angle, in that the quality of his painting is sometimes a little bit crude. As a result of that, we're always a little bit concerned with paintings by Walker because there are many copies of his work. And what makes this picture make me think that it is actually an original is, turning to the back, we see, for example, the label here, which is an old Frost and Reed label. Now, Frost and Reed were one of the main suppliers of artist materials in the 19th, and still in this century they've been supplying materials to artists. So that's a good sign. It's obviously quarter of an actual a larger artist board, which he's cut for this use. We have this inscription here, Field and Figures, 9 by 12, $8. It's by no means still a guarantee, and one would still want to be sure by authenticating the picture with the outside expert who has much more experience. However, I'm pretty convinced that this is an authentic work. It's worth, I would say, well, before I tell you what it's worth, tell me, are you going to tell me what you actually paid for it?
No.
You're not? Okay. So there are 3 figures, which is very unusual. Normally you usually just see the single figure. We've got this label here, which I'll lean against the picture. It says this is found on the reverse of the picture. It's not an original label, and in fact, actually, this is just an idea, which says Uncle Moses and his children, Sarah and Thomas, in South Carolina. It's a little bit fanciful to think that this is actually a label that refers to actually to this scene, as most of the pictures were just scenes that he painted of local life. But I think that this is a very nice example to have the children in the scene as well, and I believe it would be worth between $20,000 and $30,000 at auction.
Fantastic.
Thanks for bringing it in.
That's great. Well, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Well, that wraps it up for this edition of the Antiques Roadshow. Every week, our experts see something new and unusual, something they've never seen before. We hope you found that informative and entertaining and even exciting. So, with thanks to all our hosts here in the Minneapolis and St. Paul region, especially the people at the Hyatt Regency Hotel, with thanks also to our appraisers and to the people who brought us such great antiques to look at, I'm Chris Jussel saying so long until next time from all of us on the Antiques Roadshow.
Stay tuned now for Mystery on Channel 6.